Imagine a moment so brief, so silent, that even death itself seems to hold its breath. Commander tried to push himself upright inside the turret, but a boiling cloud of vapor crawling through the steel chamber struck him like a blast furnace, erupting in the dark. The superheated gas didn't burn him. It erased him. The steel around him glowed white, the air crackled, and for a fraction of a second, just a fraction, time stopped. Only one man still clung to life, 21-year-old driver Otto. And the only reason he survived even a few seconds longer was because the tiny, coffin-like driver's compartment slowed the heat wave just enough to give him the illusion of safety. His trembling hands slammed against the hatch. The metal burned his palms instantly, but he pushed anyway. He had no choice. His instincts screamed louder than the firestorm behind him. The hatch gave way. Otto spilled out onto the frozen soil. Half of his face melted, half of it blackened like charred wood. His eyelashes curled, his skin peeling, steam pouring from his eyes. He wasn't crying. He couldn't. What dripped down his cheeks was the last moisture left in his body turning to vapor. Medics rushed towards him. He tried to speak his throat. Torn raw, but one broken sentence escaped. Dus varina granata. This was not a shell. Then his body went limp. He wasn't delirious. He wasn't confused. He was right. This wasn't a shell. This was physics. And it was the force that would soon turn the entire Wehrmacht into a waking nightmare during the winter of 1944. By the fall of 1944, tank warfare had transformed into a brutal, merciless equation, one where emotions, courage, even tactics barely mattered anymore. There were only 4 numbers that decided everything: armor thickness, shot velocity, distance angle. Life or death could be predicted long before a shot was fired, before a soldier even saw the enemy. And in this cold arithmetic, Germany was king. Panthers and tigers weren't just armor. They were iron giants, rolling monuments to engineering precision and psychological warfare. Their silhouette alone was enough to freeze American tankers. Many Sherman crews had a grim nickname for their own vehicle: the burning coffin, the Ronson lighter, the death trap. And they weren't wrong. A Sherman's 75mm gun could barely scratch a Panther at 1200 meters. Even the improved 76mm variant often needed a miracle shot. Reports from Normandy painted a terrifying picture. It often took 5 Shermans to destroy one Panther. Sherman's life expectancy in combat: 3 to 4 engagements, 3 battles. 4, if luck was on your side. Hope wasn't dying slowly, it was in free fall, but thousands of miles away, far from the thunder of artillery and cracking machine guns. Inside the quiet halls of Aberdeen Proving Ground, another kind of war was being fought. Not with armor, not with gunpowder, but with minds. American engineers gathered around tables cluttered with molten steel samples, broken shells, and sheets filled with scribbled equations. They weren't soldiers. They weren't heroes in the traditional sense. Yet every calculation they made, every experiment they ran, determined who lived and who died thousands of miles away. Among them stood a soft-spoken physicist, Dr. Harold Peterson. He placed a tungsten carbide core on his desk, its weight dense and unnatural, and said quietly, "If this hits steel fast enough, the steel loses. Every time." From that simple, chilling truth came a weapon that would rewrite warfare. M93 HVAP, or high-velocity armor-piercing. HVAP wasn't terrifying because of its size. It was terrifying because of its design. Inside the round was a narrow, needle-like tungsten dart, far denser than steel, far harder than anything armor could reasonably resist. Surrounding it was a lightweight aluminum sabot. When fired, the sabot separated, and the tungsten darts continued forward at speeds approaching the unimaginable. This core was 2.5 times denser than steel, 4 times harder. capable of surviving temperatures that would reduce armor to glowing slag. When HVAP hit a tank, it didn't just punch through it, it melted its way inside. Only elite crews received these rounds, and they gave them a name that felt far too innocent for what it did: Hotshot. October 29, 1944, near Metz. 3 Panthers guarded a vital bridge, their engines rumbling softly, their barrels pointed toward the fields. The morning air was unnaturally still, so still that some soldiers later said they could hear their own pulse. Sergeant Michael Hartley sat inside his Sherman, breathing slowly, eyes locked on the target. "Load HVAP," he ordered. His gunner hesitated for half a second. This was their first time using it. The round slid into the chamber. Hartley steadied himself, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. Instantly, he knew something was different. The recoil felt lighter, the sound sharper. The turret vibrated in a way he had never felt before. And then the Panther simply stopped moving. No explosion, no fireball, no turret flying into the sky. Just died, as if someone had reached inside and switched it off. Smoke curled out of the hatches. Then came the screams. Then nothing. After the battle, engineers crowded around the wreck, a hole perfectly round, edges smooth like polished glass, interior walls scorched black. One engineer whispered, "They didn't penetrate this tank, they cooked it." From that moment, HVAP stopped being a weapon. It became a legend. Once HVAP entered the battlefield, the reports coming from German tank crews began to sound less like military documents and more like nightmares, scribbled in the dark. Panther and Tiger operators wrote chilling accounts. Tank destroyed with a single shot. Crew found burned, but no fire damage on the armor. A wave of heat filled the turret. Armor sliced cleanly through like a drill. Entry hole perfect circle. Exit hole identical. German intelligence was stunned. None of it matched what traditional armor-piercing rounds could do. Desperate for an explanation, analysts put forward theories that sounded like science fiction. Chemical incendiary shells, forbidden phosphorus, rounds a mysterious American heat beam, a Tesla-inspired energy weapon. But the truth was far simpler and far more terrifying. Tungsten plus velocity equals physics you cannot argue with. No magic, no forbidden technology, just pure inescapable science. And science was slaughtering steel. Winter 1944. The Ardennes. Snow fell so thick and heavy it seemed determined to smother the battlefield. Visibility dropped to 20 meters. Tanks appeared and vanished like ghosts. American units were running dangerously low on ammunition. Morale stretched thin. Some divisions had already begun to fall back, but in the very center of the chaos, Shermans loaded with HVAP stood their ground. One engagement became legendary. A Panther crept through the trees, its silhouette like a metal predator stalking prey through the blizzard. Its engine growled low as it pushed forward. Inside a hidden Sherman, the commander whispered, "HVAP, ready?" The gunner replied softly, "Ready." The trigger snapped back. The shot left the barrel, slicing through the cold fog, and the Panther erupted from the inside out. No fireball, no dramatic explosion, just an instant column of flame roaring through the turret, followed by the sound of metal collapsing like a gutted furnace. Another Panther suffered a different fate. HVAP pierced its side armor so cleanly that the crew panicked, thinking some kind of energy weapon had struck them. They tried to escape, but the heat wave inside the tank killed them before they reached the hatch. German field reports grew frantic. Enemy possesses unknown armor-piercing weapon. Conventional tactics useless. Crew morale disintegrating. Panther crews whispered a new name. A name born from fear, not strategy. Hexenschuss, the witches' strike. Some tankers fled their vehicles. Others welded on scrap metal plates, anything they could find. But tungsten didn't care. Physics didn't care. Nothing they added changed the outcome. March 1945. Crossing of the Rhine, Germany placed its final hopes on its most monstrous creation, the King Tiger, Tiger II, a steel titan. 180 millimeters of frontal armor, the strongest tank in the world. German commanders proclaimed confidently, "The armor is invincible, nothing can penetrate it." But the Americans were ready too. They had a new HVAP variant, 30E16, faster, hotter, deadlier. The moment arrived. A King Tiger rolled into position, turrets scanning the foggy riverbank like a hunter preparing to strike. An American gunner steadied his aim. He loaded the T-30E16. A breath, a trigger squeeze, a scream of metal splitting the air. The round slammed into the King Tiger's front plate. For a second, nothing happened. It appeared as though the armor had held, as though German engineering had finally met the unstoppable. Then the turret hatches blew open with a violent gasp. Thick black smoke poured out like ink spilling into water. Inside, the crew never felt a thing. When engineers inspected the wreck, even they were horrified. HVAP had not simply penetrated the armor, it melted it. It recrystallized it into strange glassy formations. It carved a laser-smooth hole through the steel. Internal shockwaves were strong enough to collapse lungs without burning skin. A German metallurgist later confessed, "We understood the physics. We simply lacked the materials and the time." Their last hope had died. By January 1945, high-ranking German officers submitted a devastating report, one that read less like military analysis and more like surrender. Armor no longer provides protection. Distance no longer offers safety. Crews feel helpless. The weapon's psychological effect is catastrophic. German tank morale collapsed faster than their front lines. Even American tankers felt torn. Proud that HVAP saved them, but haunted by what it did to their enemies. One Sherman commander put it simply, "When Germans ran, they weren't afraid of dying, they were afraid of how they died." As winter bled into spring, the Eastern Front cracked under the weight of Soviet armor, while the Western Front tightened like a steel fist around Germany's last defenses. Berlin, once the proud heart of the Reich, became a fractured maze of rubble, smoke, and fading hope. Inside underground bunkers, German officers argued, denied, and prayed. Yet nothing altered the grim reality outside. Reports flooded in daily, each more hopeless than the last. Panther destroyed by a single round. Tiger breached in under 1 second. Crew found dead with no external injuries. And then came the most damning statement of all. Armor is no longer relevant. The psychological collapse was complete. Tank crews, once symbols of elite German power, now entered their machines with trembling hands. Some scratched messages into the interior steel walls, as if trying to leave behind the last traces of their humanity. Schicksalfate, kein Schutz mehr. No more protection verloren. Lost one Panther commander wrote in his diary, shortly before Berlin fell, "I do not fear the enemy. I fear the moment the shell arrives, for in that moment I am no longer a soldier, only a man waiting for physics to decide my fate." As the Soviets closed in and American forces crossed the Rhine, German tank divisions simply evaporated. Tanks were abandoned in fields, left with engines still warm. Many crews never even attempted to fight. They were not running from bullets. They were running from inevitability. When the war finally ended and the last fires died out, the world's attention turned to the wreckage scattered across Europe. Burned panthers, shattered tigers, and melted hulks of king tigers were shipped to testing grounds for analysis. What the engineers found shocked even seasoned metallurgists. Inside one destroyed Tiger 2. Electrical wires had melted into hair, thin strands, ammunition casings curled like wax candles, crow watches frozen in place, the second hand locked forever at the moment of death. Steel plates crystallized into bizarre geometric patterns. Engineer George Keller stared at the wreckage for a long time, then whispered, "This isn't just destruction, it's transformation." Microscopic analysis revealed something unheard of. HVAP hadn't simply pierced the armor, it had altered its internal structure, forcing the steel to reconfigure under extreme heat and pressure created in just milliseconds. One metallurgist looked through a lens and murmured, "We've stepped into the next century, and we didn't." Wait for the calendar. Dr. Harold Patterson, the quiet mind behind the tungsten-cored, walked along the rows of wrecked German tanks. He placed a hand on a melted plate of Tiger armor. This wasn't just a weapon, he said softly. This was a lesson written in steel, a lesson paid for in blood, a lesson that would reshape warfare for generations. From the ashes of those burned out tanks rose a new scientific truth. Battles were no longer decided by thickness. They were decided by understanding. HVAP opened the door to an entirely new philosophy. Fin-stabilized darts, depleted uranium penetrators, hypervelocity sabot rounds, composite armor designed not to block but to defeat physics with counter-physics, active protection systems to intercept rounds before impact. Few years after the war, a classified American research report stated, "The penetrator does not simply punch through armor. It changes the rules of engagement. Future tanks must be built for science, not strength." From this moment forward, Abrams, APFSDS Leopard DM, 53/63T, 90 Svinets and Mango, all carried the DNA of the first HVAP fired in 1944. The steel night of the past was gone. The age of kinetic energy had begun, and every tank built since then lives under the same law. Speed wins, density wins, physics wins, always. When the snows of the Ardennes melted and the forests of Europe began to breathe again, burned out skeletons of tanks emerged like ghosts rising from the cold earth. Their hulls were cracked, twisted, melted silent monuments to the moment warfare changed. Dr. Peterson stood on a quiet test field, looking at the wreckage of a Panther. He spoke softly to the younger engineers around him. "People think bullets win wars, but bullets are only metal. The real weapon is the idea behind the metal." And he was right. The story that began with a single tungsten dart melting through a Panther led directly to the tanks of Korea, the armored beasts of the Cold War, the uranium darts of the Gulf War, and the hypersonic penetrators of today. Everything from Abrams to Leopard to T-90 exists because one truth cannot be denied. Armor may evolve, tanks may evolve, armies may evolve, but the laws of physics do not. And on that winter night in 1944, when Otto crawled out of that burning Panther, the world unknowingly stepped into a new era of warfare. An era where steel was no longer king, where bravery wasn't enough, where survival belonged to those who understood the invisible forces shaping the battlefield. In the end, it wasn't a shell that changed the world. As the decades passed and the memories of World War II slowly dissolved into black and white photographs and dusty archives, the truth behind HVAP did not fade. Instead, it grew quietly, invisibly into the backbone of every armored doctrine that followed. The world had seen what happened when raw physics met steel, and no nation could ignore it. Countries that once believed in thick armor and brute force began to understand the harsh reality. Nothing built by human hands can outrun the laws of nature. And so, a new race began. Not a race for land, not for ideology, but a race for understanding. Scientists, engineers, strategists, all trying to unravel the same question: if our armor could no longer protect, what could? As the Cold War tightened its icy grip around the globe, two superpowers faced each other with thousands of tanks lined across Europe like metallic beasts waiting for a command. But unlike 1944, these tanks were not built merely from steel. They were built from lessons. The United States, remembering the fate of Panthers and Tigers, developed next-generation APF-SDS rounds, dart-like penetrators fired at hypersonic velocity, capable of slicing through armor as if it weren't even there. The Soviet Union responded with its own brutal innovations: reactive armor, composite layers, angled plates designed to scatter and deflect the incoming spear of tungsten or uranium. The battlefield was no longer a clash of steel. It was chess played at the speed of physics, and yet, despite the nuclear threats, the political tension, the armies standing mere kilometers apart, there was a strange kind of stability, because both sides knew the first tank to fire would not win. The first tank to be hit would simply vanish. It created a delicate balance, a silent agreement forged not by diplomats but by engineers and mathematicians who understood the consequences of their work. In a quiet office at Aberdeen decades later, Dr. Peterson, older now, hair grayed, shoulders hunched, sat in front of a new generation of students and researchers. Tanks roared outside on the test tracks, but inside the only sound was the scratching of pens. He held up a small tungsten dart, sleek, dense, cold. The same kind of dart that had changed the fate of armor in 1944. This, he said softly, is not a weapon. His students looked confused. He continued, a weapon is something you create to destroy, but this changed how we think. It taught us that the battlefield is not ruled by courage or hatred, but by equations. He turned the dart in his hand, watching the light catch its polished surface. Every tank destroyed in 1944, every melted plate of armor, every man who never made it home, was part of a lesson we are still learning today. The room remained silent because everyone understood what he meant. Weapons evolve, ideologies fade, but the impact of HVAP endured. The M1, Abrams, Leopard 2, Challenger 2, T-72, T-80, T-90, all of them, no matter the country, no matter the ideology, carried inside their DNA the same truth discovered in 1944. If you want to survive, you must respect physics. Composite armors became multi-layered puzzles of ceramics, resins, metals, synthetic fibers, each engineered not to block energy but to break its rhythm. Penetrators grew longer, denser, faster, no longer bullets but spears designed to defeat matter itself. Even tank turrets changed shape, becoming wedges and slopes meant to redirect forces into harmless directions. It wasn't evolution, it was adaptation, survival through understanding. 1991. The desert of Kuwait glowed beneath the burning sun, and once again, steel beasts faced one another on the battlefield. But this time, it wasn't Panthers or Shermans. It was Abrams tanks firing depleted uranium penetrators, descendants of the HVAP lineage. And when those DU darts struck older Soviet-designed armor, history repeated itself. Tanks didn't explode, they didn't shatter. They simply ceased, just like in Metz, just like in the Ardennes, just like the King Tiger on the Rhine. One American commander wrote after the war, "The enemy never saw us. By the time we fired, the fight was already over. Their armor belonged to another century." Exactly as Patterson predicted. Today, modern tank designers face the same truth that Otto felt in 1944. The truth that melted the inside of a Panther. The truth that shattered Nazi armor. The truth that turned tank warfare into a science. On the battlefield, physics is the undefeated champion. Every tank around fired today, APFSDS, Sabot uranium core, tungsten dart, carries that same invisible signature. Speed, density, Doc energy. It is the legacy of a moment when a young German driver crawled out of a burning tank, steam pouring from his eyes, and whispered, "This was not a shell." He was right. It wasn't a shell. It was the first glimpse of the future. War has many faces. Politics, tragedy, bravery, cruelty, but there is another face, an unseen one, often ignored yet always present. Science. In every melted hatch, every perfect penetration hole, every crew cabin scorched from within, there is a lesson carved into the metal. War is not just fought by soldiers. It is fought by ideas, by the people in quiet rooms drawing equations on paper, testing metals in furnaces, building the weapons that shape history. And in the end, as tanks sit silent on abandoned fields, as their hulks rust under rain and snow, as nations move on, one truth remains unchanged. Armor may fade, tanks may rust, wars may end, but physics never dies. This is the legacy of HVAP, a legacy written not in textbooks but in steel, fire, and the silence that follows.